Korea's social development is not merely a result of economic growth, but also a result of social policies. Or so said Dr. Lee Il-chung, the only Korean member of the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, or Unrest. Currently working with the UN in Geneva, Switzerland, Dr. Lee is visiting Korea for a social development project. Good morning, Dr. Lee.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, what do we mean when we say social development?
I think that is very difficult question because every scholar has different definition about social development. I mean, in the 1960s and 70s, development was defined as growth and change. So after that, scholars with different ideas picked up different ideas from those definitions composed of growth and change. So some scholars emphasize the growth aspect. So economic development was defined as a development. Or some scholars emphasize social aspect and emphasize changes. So you may have different definitions of social development, but to me, I think it is about change. It is progressive change, especially. And recently, Amartya Sen, who is Nobel laureate in economics, defined development as freedom. He said development is to enhance your capacity to do what you have a reason to do. And I think that says something about development. So development is for you to do something you have a reason to do. So that is my definition of social development too.
So what does the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, or Unrest, do?
Our institution was established in 1963. At that time, as I said, some scholars, especially within UN circle, they have a great emphasis on economic growth only in terms of development project or development policy. So some scholars in Nordic countries concerned about that direction, and they made an emphasis on the necessity for UN to have a research institution focusing on social aspect of development. So they named it UN Research Institute for Social Development, and they established institution to do a research on social aspect of development. So since 1963, our institution is doing a research on social development. That doesn't mean that we do not do research on economic development, but we do research on much more comprehensive development, including both economic and social development aspect.
When you say social aspects of development, can you give us some specific examples of what we're talking about here?
Normally, we mean education, health, care, or in terms of social problems, maybe inequality, poverty. So you just think about some countries with mineral resources. I mean, their countries' economic growth rates are very high and fast, but still they have a huge inequality and poverty. So we can say that country has a high rate of economic growth, but low rate of social development or social growth.
Then what are your responsibilities with the Unrest?
Well, I brought up research coordinators, and we have 3 research coordinators under the director. And my job title is research coordinator, so I do both research and coordination. So I do research on poverty and economic development and social development issues. And I do coordinate all those commission research to scholars in both developed and developing countries. So normally it is said that research coordinator is supposed to do 2 or 3 research projects per year, and I do 2 or 3 projects per year.
Is there a particular region in the world you specialize in?
No, I mean, we are supposed to cover every country in the world because, as you know, I mean, the poverty and inequality problem is everywhere. Yeah.
So your visit to Korea this time is to work with the Korea International Cooperation Agency, or KOICA. What sort of a project are you here for?
Well, we started joint research project in 2011. And at that time, KOICA felt that Korean development experience was misinterpreted by developing countries. So they wanted to have much more comprehensive and accurate view about Korean development experience. Especially, they have a concern about the interpretation just paying attention to economic growth only. But Korean model in the international world is understood like the country which achieved both economic and social development, and Korea has achieved a fast economic growth, but at the same time they has achieved low inequality, and they successfully reduced the poverty in a very short time period. So KOICA wanted to show lessons from Korean experience in both senses, economic growth and social development. So obviously, I think Unrest is the perfect organization to do a research for that purpose. So we started that project from 2011, and now we are in the final stage.
I see. And the quote that I gave at the beginning, Korea's social development is not merely a result of economic growth, but also a result of social policies. What did you mean by that?
I think social policy also can be defined in different senses. The traditional definition of social policy is very much about the experiences of developed countries. So we are talking about insurances and all that. Obviously, we cannot find that kind of social policy program in the 1950s and 60s of Korea. But if we expand the definition of social policy as a policy to affect welfare of people as a whole, as a society, I think we can find equivalents to those social policy programs in Korea too. We call them functional equivalents, or of social policy by other means. So if you look at land reform in the 1940s and 50s, I think that is a great social policy to redistribute wealth to people. And because of that, we have a foundation. Korea has a foundation to have a more equal society in rural area and in urban area too. And it provided the kind of foundation for industrialization in urban area too. So you cannot find that kind of land reform in many developing countries in those days. So it is a great social policy and education policy too. In the early 1950s, the Korean government has set the goal like a universal primary education, and that is a great social policy too. So those kind of social policies can be found in Korean development experiences, and that those aspects were ignored in the interpretation of other countries who wanted to learn Korean experiences or lessons.
I see. Then, is Korea's social development up to par with its economic development?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So you don't think there are still areas that are socially under?
But there is actually. Especially listen phenomena is not that satisfactory, especially since 1997. The
foreign exchange crisis?
Yeah, Asian economic crisis. I think after that, Korean labor market structure was changed. So we have much more non-standardized form of employment. And now, I heard that so many young ones are suffering from the job security and the unemployment problems. So I think since 1997, inequality rate has been increasing, I heard. And that kind of problem is at the core of social problems we have to deal with. So, but I think the governments have made an effort in terms of policies and all that. So I expect the current government to do something to address those issues and problems as well.
Yeah. You recently gave a lecture at Gyeonggi Cyber University about sociology and social sciences. What topics did you cover?
I think the two things I want to talk about that lecture. Gyeonggi Cyber University is one symbol of social development of Korea, because Gyeonggi Cyber University is like a university for those who missed the opportunity to do a university education in their appropriate age. So most students are in their 30s or 40s. And I think that shows something about Korean social development. I mean, the Korean government or Korean educational institutions do not give up the hope to educate people even though they are in their 40s or 50s or 30s. I think that educational kind of spirit is something about Korean social development. So that's why I wanted to give a lecture there instead of other universities. And I gave a lecture about social policy within a development context, which says about the past, present, and future of social policy in developing countries. What I wanted to emphasize was you can find or you can establish social policies in developing countries even though they are poor to do social development. So you have to pay attention to those lessons we can learn from advanced countries, because those advanced countries in the 21st century had established their own social development programs when they were very poor in Europe. For instance, Scandinavian countries started their social development programs, social policy programs in their 30s and 40s when they were very poor. So I wanted to emphasize you can do it. You can do social policy programs in developing countries.
You actually went to Seoul National University, then went on to study policy development at Oxford. You lectured in Malaysia, became a tenured professor at a National Japanese University. How did you end up working for Unrest?
Well, I always dreamed of engaging the developing countries. You know, I wanted to do something for people who missed opportunity, who have sufferings. And that's why I wanted to study social policy for my doctoral degree. And when I was in Malaysia and Japan, I was involved in various international development projects. And so I wanted to do a much more action-oriented or operation-oriented work. And I came across Dr. Thandika Mukandawira, the former director of our institute. And he inspired me to do UN work, I guess. I mean, so I applied for the vacant job in Unrest, and I got the job.
Yeah, and is it a rewarding job, do you think?
Yeah, I'm very satisfied with my job. I like my job, and I learn every day, and that is very important thing to me.
And is what you researched and learned actually put into practice in some parts of the world?
Yeah. I think one of my jobs is to consult the government officers and NGO activists and policy makers. So we are supposed to convey lessons we got from the research to those policymakers to reflect those lessons on policies they make. So that is part of kind of action we do in UN.
What's it like being the only Korean there?
Well, that is a bit strange expression, because, you know, in definition, in theory maybe, you know, every UN organization is supposed to have 193 member countries
represented.
Yeah. And my institution is very small actually, so it's nothing special that I'm only Korean, because there is only Venezuelan or only Australian or whatever. But I think the UN spirit or UN principle is not to pay attention to their nationalities, because we are supposed to serve a member country, not our own country. But I'm proud of a Korean experience, because I'm doing research on development, and Korea is always raised as a good example of successful development in both economic and social development.
Does the world look at Korea that way?
Of course, yes.
Okay. You mentioned in other interviews that you'd eventually like to help North Korea develop its social policy should the opportunity arise.
Yeah.
When and how did you start becoming interested in North Korea?
I guess majority of Korean young ones have that kind of hope or wish or dream, and I'm one of them. And I think because I'm doing research on development. And Korea is the first country to need that kind of development project or development idea. And I'm sure that our research can be helpful to North Korean government to make a developmental plan for their own people, not for their own government or whatever. So I think if there is any kind of environment or conditions made, I think I want to go to Korea and to do research to help them to make their development plan themselves.
Where would you start?
I think maybe I have to start with Korean people first, because that process...
South Korean people?
Yeah. I think that should be based on consensus on development. And sometimes I can find cleavages between South Korean people's ideas about North Korean development. Which one is North Korean's development? So maybe I have to make a consensus on North Korean development within South Korean society first. Because I'm not allowed to go to North Korea, but I'm allowed to go to South Korea. So maybe I can start with South Korean people first.
Yeah. In the meantime, if there is a word of advice you could give for the youth of Korea.
I heard so many Korean young ones have a wish or hope to work for UN or international organization,
Right.
and they are working very hard to enhance their language capacity or language proficiency, and many kind of experiences they want to make to do work with UN or international organizations. But I think the first thing they have to do is to dream a dream. I think without dream, I think that kind of technical aspects can be meaningless. So I think you have to make a sequence: dream and then capacity building.
What kind of a dream? I
think
mean,
the
the dream of working
work-
for an international organization is not enough.
Dream. Well, that can be the dream. But what I'm talking about is to dream a just world, better world, better self, a better self to others, a better friend to others. That kind of thing. That is a genuine sense of dream, I think.
Okay. What is the next step after your work here with Koika?
Well, we are in the final stage of project, and the 2 volumes, one in English, one in Korean, will come out in December or November, maybe October. And I think because there are so many areas we have to explore still, so I think we want to have further collaboration with Korean agencies, including Koika, to extract lessons from Korean development and convey those lessons to developing countries for their own development.
So hopefully the results of the project that will come out in December will serve as an example or a model to other developing countries as well.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yi, for coming in and sharing your expertise and work with us this morning. I wish you the best of luck with your endeavors.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our guest today, Dr. Il Chung from the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. And with that, we're wrapping up 101.3 Main Street for today. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Stay tuned for K-Popular with As One coming up next. I'm An Jang-hyun. Have a great day. I'll meet you back here tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock on the dot. Taking us out today is David Bowie with Changes.